Look, real talk, if you've never heard of or considered Fujifilm for video work, the X-T30 is like a slap in the face saying, hey creator, we're for real and this is our way of proving it. I ask you, what other camera can be had for under $1,000 that has access to DCI 4K internal and 422 10-bit to an external recorder while having some of the best looking straight out of camera images you're gonna find? Well, none, you know. That's the whole point of the video. What's up everyone, I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. So on to the X-T30. Now we've already done a series of videos of initial impressions about this powerhouse, but I've been using this pretty solidly in my production workflow for the last 30 days, and it's time to share my longer term impressions. I mean, I'm impressionable, so I never actually say review because ain't nobody got time to go through every single minute detail of a camera, especially a Fujifilm camera. Have you seen their menus? But before we get too far into the video, I do want to thank my friends over at B&H Photo for loaning me this camera for a couple of weeks to make some videos. If you'd like to get your own pocket powerhouse, there will be links in the description below. The Fuji X-T30 is a very weird camera, or maybe a better way to put that is unique. On the one hand, yes, it's the successor to the X-T20, but what it really is a smaller, less feature-packed, which is crazy to call something with this much functionality less feature-packed than its big brother, the X-T3. And maybe that by itself doesn't make it unique, but what does is for the asking price, you gain recording codecs, frame rates, and resolutions you won't see again until much more expensive cameras. And look how darn small this thing is. This is one of the smallest cameras like around. Now, if you saw last week's series of videos about the M50, this little guy back there, the whole purpose behind those videos was me looking for a camera for my second YouTube channel. And what actually kicked off that entire hunt was this X-T30. This was the first camera I considered to do that, but you know what? Let's pop this on the tripod really quick and have this be the B cam for the rest of the video. There we go in all that Fujifilm Eterna film simulation goodness. Now let's do a quick spec overview if this is your first X-T30 video, but trust me, we won't stay here long because specs are boring. So boring. The X-T30 has a 26.1 megapixel X-Trans CMOS sensor, and it can record in up to DCI, that means 17:9 Cinema 4K and 16:9 UHD at 30 frames per second. You can additionally do 2K, which is 17:9, and 1080p in up to 120 frames per second. And it can do those recording modes in up to 200 megabits per second. And it can do all of those resolutions in 422 10-bit like we mentioned earlier if you're using an external recorder, which again is nuts because you can find these used online for like 800 bucks. Like that's crazy. Plus it also has a 425-point phase detection autofocus system, which sounds great, but we'll talk more about this later. So how has this stood the test of time? First up, we gotta talk video quality because the image coming out of the X-T30 is beautiful. Beautiful, like legitimately some of my favorite straight out of the camera images I've ever gotten. And it's the X-T3 too. It's the whole sensor that Fuji's come up with. Like, it looks good, the colors are vibrant, the image is sharp, and the dynamic range is pretty inspiring for a budget-sized version of a camera from a company that's not really known for their video prowess. My favorite part of the X-T30 is the ability to record in the 200 megabits per second codec, allowing you to capture a little more information. And this is important to me because I'm starting to dabble in a little bit of post-processing. I might have even used a LUT or two in a log format in the last couple of weeks. And that little bit of information can go a very long way to move the image around later. Now, we haven't mentioned it yet, but the biggest negative about the X-T30, and this actually sucks pretty bad, it's the recording limits. And surprisingly enough, I don't actually mind the 10-minute recording limit on the 4K. Like, I think that's reasonable because that puts this more in line with other cameras of this shockingly small size, like the RX cameras, because there is absolutely heat. I mean, heat will absolutely be an issue if you record in high bitrate and high frame rate resolutions, especially with the camera so small. But my real issue is the 15-minute 1080p recording limit. Now that's real unfortunate because even Canon cameras, the cameras that get beaten up on all the time for having the worst specs, even I do that. I mean, that can do 1080p for up to 30 minutes at a time. 15 minutes is just too short, and I would think that they could increase this with a firmware update if the engineers think they can manage that heat. I really hope they figure out a way because it's just, while Canon may give you less information, might give you less recording resolutions and options, I mean, it's just more convenient to use. Another real issue I've had with the X-T30, and you might have seen it so far while recording, I hope not, but I can't see because there's no flip screen, is the autofocus. Now, the autofocus is labeled as Fuji's most cutting edge, but I do have some problems with it. Now, first off, if I'm outdoors, I have sunglasses on because I'm just cool. But also my eyes are crazy sensitive, so the second I go outside, I have to have sunglasses on. And while you're wearing sunglasses, the autofocus has no idea what to do. Eye tracking, face tracking, it just has no idea what to do. I mean, even the face tracking autofocus from not that far away will have problems holding even with well-lit situations. And the settings turned to max stick and slowest transition speed, I'll still get it to warp in and out, which I'm sure it's doing right now, and that really sucks. So the autofocus works fantastic for stills, but for continuous video autofocus, especially if you're gonna use a shallow depth of field on one of their prime lenses, it's not as great. And the last real complaint I have about the video quality is on the audio side, and that's the 2.5mm audio jack instead of the standard 3.5mm. Now sure, buying a cheap little adapter in the grand scheme of things isn't a big deal, but I lose dongles and little parts all of the time. I mean, I basically treat the X-T30 like an RX100 because of this, and I'll never record internally to the camera itself. I'll bring my Zoom H1N or some other kind of external audio recording. Now, those are legitimate problems with the camera, and they suck, but I want to say that if you can be behind the camera, this thing produces an incredible image. Like, these issues hurt more because of how good the X-T30 actually is at making beautiful images. And I didn't forget the lack of in-body image stabilization, but the lens OIS that Fuji has, especially in their kit lens, it more than makes up for that in my opinion. And to prove it, let's hop outside real quick for a video / vlogging test. Welcome to the vlogging test of the Fuji X-T30. This camera, we've been using it for about 30 days straight now, and I've used it in video, I've used it for photos. The image quality on this camera is just like second to none. Like, it is incredible. The sharpness is awesome, the dynamic range is awesome, the colors are just great, like straight out of the camera. I don't know of another camera brand that looks this good just like without doing anything to it. Like, I'm so impressed with the image quality. The only big negative that you're probably seeing right now is there is no in-body image stabilization, but I do think that this kit lens has good enough OIS that it doesn't really matter. I mean, even right now, we're just walking around hand holding the camera without a gimbal or anything like that, and I think the stabilization works perfectly well. The real problem that I have with the X-T30 is, you might notice I'm not wearing my sunglasses right now, because I've noticed even the eye tracking, the face tracking, all the autofocus is super unreliable if you're wearing anything that covers your eye. Even without that, I've had some problems with the autofocus on the camera, which is kind of unfortunate. But yeah, even now, we're recording without a microphone. So this is the audio that you can get just straight out of the camera. Like, I like this camera so much. The image is so good. I really just wish that it had a little more usability, like a la the Canon M50. The Canon M50 has an okay image, but it's like super usable. This has a super image, and it's like, okay usability. Okay. Back to the video. And we're back. I'm just continuously impressed by the images. However, in this line of creation, technical image quality is only important up to a certain point, and it's not very far. What's more important is how fiddly is the camera to use both before and after you hit record. Like, how easy is it to get those images? Because we don't have time to mess around. I mean, content creation basically means the camera has to be part of the creation process. Like, it has to be its own operator. Now, the physical body of the camera I actually really like a lot. I like how small it is, and while that should lead to not liking the holding experience, it doesn't bother me that much. There are hand grips, there are other things you can buy to make it a little easier to hold if you want that, but because the lenses are so small and because it's such a tiny system, I don't mind it. Plus, the physical dials are very robust in the X-T30, and even though it's tiny, you do get a little joystick to both pick focusing points and scroll through the menus. Speaking of the menus, when I first started using a Fuji camera last year with the X-T30, I was totally lost. I mean, having so many options and settings and features and abilities is great until you've got to plop those into a coherent user interface, and this one is functional, but it does not win any points for elegance. You do not have an elegant menu system. You do eventually come around to it. I mean, you can learn any menu system, but this is probably the least friendly of all the menu systems I've ever come across. I even personally like Sony menu systems more than the Fuji ones. Now, setting the camera up with the combined physical dials and menus isn't terrible, but how easy is it to use after you hit record? Well, we've already mentioned the autofocus, the IBIS, the lack of a flip screen, and those are really the three criterias I judge this on. Awkward. Yes, it's lacking in all three of those areas, but it's not all doom and gloom, because one of the things, the tally light that I'm looking at right now, like there's a light on the front that will show you if you are recording, and that's insanely useful. Like we already mentioned, the kit lens's OIS is fantastic, and while there isn't anything to fix the flip screen because the app is garbage and it's terrible, I mean, 2 out of the 3 isn't bad. It could be worse. And all of this time later, how are the lenses and ecosystem holding up? Now, we already talked about the glass because this kit lens is probably the best kit lens of any camera ever made, and Fuji has a fantastic assortment of glass. It's probably the single best APS-C collection of lenses you are going to find. They've got inexpensive but sharp primes. We're currently on the 35mm f2. Their zooms are definitely impressive, and if you want to upgrade bodies, that X-T30 is one of the most feature-packed cameras ever released. It was one of my favorite cameras of last year. It can do things that nothing else can come close to at the price range. Like, it's shockingly good. Now, I have had some problems with focus breathing on the f2 primes, and I wish more of their zooms had OIS built in, but it's got lenses that I wish every single APS-C format camera could release. Like, the lenses are pretty good. Now, at the end of the month? So what, right? Now, listening back through this video, I'm pretty rough on the X-T30 because it's missing a lot of features, but it's the good that makes the bad so remarkable. But you also have to remember the price, because you could buy this today for $850. Now, at that range, you could buy the A6300, the G85, and maybe a used 80D. And not a single one of those cameras could touch the internal recording specs of the X-T30. The G85 does have unlimited recording, which trumps the X-T30, but it doesn't have DCI. Now, I really like this camera, and I wish it had a few more usability features to it, and it would be a no-brainer. But if you want the best image from behind the camera, or you just want a small travel camera and you don't need to film yourself that much, absolutely give the X-T30 a shot. It produces a beautiful image. Thanks for watching.